Hey guys, one of the advantages of having a video is that if you feel like I'm going too quickly, or if there's a section that you're not really sure about, one thing that you can do is stop the video, go back, rewind, rewatch as many times as you need to. Another advantage of this is that you can actually go through and work out the problem ahead of me, get the problem, work it out, and then restart the video to see that you're doing the steps exactly like you should. So you can kind of play with this and see what works best for you. But we are going to go ahead and do a couple more examples. So let's start with this first example. All right, so this example is 2n minus 6 plus 4n squared. So we start with our simplify, rearrange, and remove a greatest common factor. So simplify means that we combine like terms, and this has already been combined as much as it can be. Rearrange means that should be in standard form. And so if we look at this, remember that standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c, meaning our highest exponent should go first, then the next exponent, and then our constant is the last number. So if we look at this, it is not in standard form, so we do need to rearrange this. So we start with our positive 4n squared. Then we move to our 2n, so plus 2n. And then finally our constant, which is negative 6. Okay, so those are the values this is the correct writing of this in standard form. And then the final step is to remove a greatest common factor. And so if you look at this problem, there is also a greatest common factor, 2. Okay, all of these are even numbers, so 2 is actually our greatest common factor. So we're going to pull 2 out. And remember, to find what this trinomial is after we pull out the factor, we divide every section of this, every term, by the 2. So 4n squared divided by 2 is 2n squared. 2n divided by 2 is just 1n. And negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Okay, so once we've done that, we can look at that, and it should look oddly familiar because it is a problem that we've already done, but we're going to work it out one more time just in case you were a little unsure about it. And so once again, we've removed our greatest common factor. We've gone through these steps. Now we have a trinomial. So first step is the factor test. If it's prime, awesome. That's all we have to do. If it's not, we're going to move on to backwards FOIL. So factor test on this. We're going to do b squared minus 4ac. So our b value is 1. Our a value is 2. And our c value is negative 3. So 1 squared is 1. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times 3 is a positive 24, which gives us 25, which is a square, which means it can be factored. Okay, so I don't want to lose this 2 up here. Remember, it is part of the final answer, so I'm just going to keep adding it in as I write the problem so that I don't forget that it's there. But just remember that it's here, okay? So 2 times 2n squared plus n minus 3 is what we're working with. All right, so here we know that it's a factor, so what we're going to be looking for are 2 factors whose product is equal to a times c, and whose sum is equal to b, remember? So a times c, let's see, 2 times negative 3, so 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, and b is 1. So we want 2 numbers that multiply to equal negative 6 and add to equal 1, okay? So this is similar to the last problem, one of the problems that we did, but it is not exactly the same. So we do need to look at our factors again. So we have 2 times negative 3 would give me negative 6. And 1 times negative 6 would also give me negative 6. And if I add them together, 2 plus negative 6, I'm sorry, I didn't have that down so you could see it. 2 plus negative 3 is going to be negative 1, and 1 plus negative 6 is negative 5, okay? So that is not a value of 1. So let's try negative 2 and 3 and negative 1 and 6 and see what happens. So here we have negative 2 times 3 is negative 6, which is what I want. Negative 1 times 6 is also negative 6. If I add those together, I get a positive 5. And if I add these together, I'm going to get a positive 1. So these are the two numbers that I'm looking for. They multiply to get negative 6, and if I add them, I get a positive 1. Okay, so those are the two numbers that I'm going to use. So remember that the next step is to expand the trinomial into a 4-term polynomial and then group the terms. So we're going to expand this. So again, the 2 is just out here. We're just trying not to forget it. Then we have 2n squared, and then we're using this negative 2, so negative 2n, and this positive 3n, and then continue out the rest of the term, the minus 3. All right, so now we've done that. Remember, 2 is still out here. We're not forgetting about him. Then we're going to group these. So the first grouping was going to be 2n squared minus 2n and 3n minus 3. And that leads us to our third step. So third step is to remove the greatest common factors of these two binomials. So remember, 2 is still out here. We're not forgetting about him. We're just kind of leaving him to the side. Then we're going to look at greatest common factors here. What is the greatest common factor between 2n squared and negative 2n? All right, it's going to be 2n. And if I divide 2n squared by 2n, I just get n. And if I divide negative 2n by 2n, I get negative 1. Okay. Now here, I have 3n minus 3. So if I pull out our greatest common factor here, it's 3. And 3n divided by 3 is n. And negative 3 divided by 1 is negative 1. Sorry, negative 3 divided by 3 is negative 1. Okay. So now that we have removed our greatest common factors, we're going to separate what we have into two binomial factors. Okay, so remember that's part of our steps. So the final step, this is a big problem, is we're going to write out our factors. So 2 is still a factor. We're still bringing it down. N minus 1, both here, so n minus 1 becomes a factor. And then the final step is we take the remainders, 2n and 3. So 2n plus 3 creates our final factor. Okay. All of our powers are 1, so we should be done, but we do need to prove ourselves. So we're going to prove our answer by multiplying all 3 of these back together. So I'm going to start with multiplying these two terms together. So we're going to do the first two. We have 2n times n is 2n squared. And then the outer 2, 3 times n is 3n. The inner 2 is negative 1 times 2n. And the last 2 is negative 1 times 3, which is negative 3. Okay. Then we're going to combine our terms here. We have 2n squared plus n minus 3. We still have this 2, so we have to bring it down and multiply 2 by all of these things. So 2 times 2n squared is 4n squared. 2 times n is 2n, and 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. And if we look back at our original problem, we will notice that we do have 4n squared plus 2n minus 6, so that is the correct answer right here. 2 is a factor, n minus 1 is a factor, and 2n plus 3 is also a factor.